We're here today with Judge Richard B. KLEIN.
Great.
I wanted to include that middle initial, who's formerly a judge of the Court of Common Pleas in the First Judicial District of Pennsylvania, and spent 6 years on the Superior Court of
8,
Pennsylvania.
actually.
Oh, okay. That's even better. Is the total still 36 years?
Total still 36, 28 and 8.
Oh, I see. All right. Well then. So we have a bit of information to go through and to find out about. Also, you've been very active both during and since your tenure on the bench, I know. If we could start at the beginning then and talk about a little bit about your early life and your family and where you came from.
Well, I've lived in Overbrook, and I was in a judicial household all my life because my father went on the bench in 1934. He was mostly in orphans court and criminal court. So judicial talk around the dining room table started when I was very young. And after I got out of law school, I practiced in a small firm that got gobbled up by a big firm, and I went back again in a small firm, and I had the political bug and got involved in that. And for a number of years, I served as chair of the Republican Policy Committee of Philadelphia, which is sort of a mixed group of people in the political system and people in the business and legal world. There was sort of a spokesman for the party when there wasn't an election going on, and then I was working full time, really, in the campaign of Thatcher Longstreth against Frank Rizzo, and we lost, and my practice sort of shriveled up, and then there were a whole bunch of, at one point, because there was a deal hadn't been made, they needed somebody to put on the ticket who would withdraw if they worked the deal out.
Yeah.
So I was working in the campaign. I said, sure, I can give a speech when Thatcher gives a speech, and the deal never got cut, so I stayed on the ticket. And after we lost, they created 25 new judges in Philadelphia, and as a defeated candidate, I rose to the top of the list where I wouldn't have been otherwise. So I wound up being, and I think the record still stands in Philadelphia, the youngest judge in the history of, certainly of Philadelphia, and at that time in the history of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I did see that. What about your early life then? Where did you go to? Did you go to a private school?
I went to Friends Central, which is just around the corner from where I lived in Overbrook Farms.
Yeah, I don't want to rush past the Phi Beta Kappa at Amherst and the honors rating there in Harvard Law School. I just have to put those in there.
Okay.
Okay.
They're true.
Yeah, right. So when you began your career on the bench, and it's an interesting way that you came about to get on the bench. What kind of cases were you handling and that sort of thing?
I was originally assigned to the family court division, which was kind of interesting because, I went in and said, I guess I can't, to the president judge, who was Donald Jamison, then a Republican, and I said, I can't go into the orphans court because my father's in there. And, I guess trial division because I've never even been in the family court building. And he said, I have to send you to family court because Frank Montemuro was there and he's going to be up for re-election as administrative judge. They were elected in those days. And we need a Republican to do that. So I said, okay. So I went there and I went to all the juvenile institutions and I then worked. Then I lost an election on the way to the polls. Something funny happened. I thought there was a deal then, but it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And then, so I was in practice, and I was doing a lot of family law with Al Momjian, who was the dean of family law practitioners. And then I come back, I finally get Democratic endorsement, and I come back on the bench 2 years later, and I go to Ed Bradley, who is the president judge, and said, okay, send me back to family court. And he said, I can't do that, Dick. I said, what? He says, yeah, well, because Frank Montemuro is up for administrative judge, and I need a Democrat there. I said, but I was elected as a Democrat. My commitment is on those votes to vote, you know. He said, no, I just can't do it. So what happened was there were two Democratic candidates, and there was a real war between them. And the losing candidate was so mad that candidate cast it, and his supporters voted for Montemuro, and he got reelected anyway. But that's sort of how the politics of the court works.
Right. By the way, I worked over there for 19 years before I came.
Very well run operation.
Yeah.
Frank Montemuro was an incredible guy and a great administrator.
Yeah, he was, and a good man, too.
He totally ran it. We had meetings of the judges, but they were just to say, yes, Frank. We'll do that.
And then, so you came over here then
Right.
after your stint there, and you worked in criminal court for a while. I know
Yeah,
you also got involved in civil, right? In the civil.
well, I was in the criminal court, I guess, I wound up in, even though I was in family division,
Yeah.
the first assignments were in criminal court. And I remember, because I had very little criminal experience, and my later clerk and good friend and later judge, Judge Gene Cohen, had been clerking for Judge McGlynn, and he was in the courtroom my first day. And again, because they hadn't had all lawyers in municipal court at that time, I was there where I could do less damage.
Okay.
So he was kind of sitting in the jury box going like this on evidentiary rulings. After the first, after we did the first segment of the court, I said, well, Gene, how did I do? He said, well, really, you did pretty well for the first time, except what you're supposed to say is the court will stand in recess for 5 minutes, not, okay, let's break for 5.
Let's break for coffee and a Danish.
That was my, experience as a band leader, so.
Now, I know that you've also been, and I interviewed you once, and I'm not sure what was going on, but it may have been about the Futures Commission.
The Futures Commission, yeah. It happened, but I don't know how I got there, but there was a program in, I think it was New Orleans, where they brought in judges and administrators from all across the country to say, look, everybody's always dealing with a crisis, but maybe we should start looking ahead and see what we can do to head off crises in the past.
Okay.
I mean, one of the programs that I was very much involved in was the asbestos case program, and when the cases first started popping up, and I think Harry Takeoff, who later was court administrator, was in charge of it, you could look at the fact as how long it took you to get sick after being exposed to asbestos.
And almost predict.
Yeah, and how many people worked in Philadelphia shipyards, which is where much of the early cases came from. There was very great exposure there. And you could realize you were going to have a crisis coming up.
Yeah.
And nobody did anything for, until we had a crisis. And
Right, of course.
Did all sorts of, I was in charge then, and did all sorts of strange things to try and move a lot of this insurmountable mass tort, the first mass tort kind of program. And the other thing is like in family court, you could see that marriages were starting to break up at an unprecedented rate.
Okay.
And you knew that was going to go there, but nobody, did anything about it until the crisis hit.
Yeah.
So the idea of the Futures Commission was to break things down and look ahead. And it's very hard to get people to look ahead, particularly people who are in power, who are worrying about the problems of the day.
Right.
Yeah, if somebody comes in with cancer in a gunshot wound, you got to fix the gunshot wound first.
Yeah.
And I think we did a lot of very good things in that, and ultimately a lot of the recommendations of the reports were adopted, and I was very much involved in the ADR part of it.
Yeah.
And then, which I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And then some of the technology things, because I was very involved in court technology early.
Okay. Now, I know that, I believe that the asbestos program has since been closed or something akin to that, where all the backlog has been, or whatever cases were left.
Well, I thought that would happen, but it really hasn't.
Okay.
Most of the cases now are people with less exposure, which can cause mesothelioma or cancer of the lining of the lung. And that's almost inevitably fatal relatively quickly. So there's still cases there, but other mass torts have exploded. One of the things I did was sort of drag Sandy Moss into the program. We worked together for a year, and then she took it over and became the queen of mass torts.
Yes.
And she was able to wangle building part and judges and the rest. I was doing it at the time when I think it was 17 judges were suspended for taking cash Christmas presents from the Roofers Union.
Yeah.
And, we didn't have any judges. We were doing it with mirrors.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of strange things over there. And did a bunch of things that wound up being models nationally.
Yeah.
For example, reverse bifurcation started in my courtroom.
Okay.
Which means you try damages before you do the liability.
First, yeah.
And that happened accidentally because there was one guy who weren't sure anything was wrong with him, and one of the lawyers said, hey, if all the evidence is going to be in for damages as well as whether he's sick or not, so why don't we do that first? That sounds like a good idea. Anybody object?
Yeah.
And we just did it and carried on. A lot of the things there that we planned very thoroughly fell on their face, and things we just happened upon really worked like a charm. So
it's the only way to get ahead, really. I mean, you have to try and sometimes fail and realize, well, okay, I can rule that out.
Yep.
Let's move on with this. And as it turns out, as I just said, I think that the program was very, very successful. As I think a lot of the mass tort program, the other individual programs that are involved in mass torts have been handled very well by
Yeah, well,
your colleagues.
again, well, Sandy did a wonderful job,
Yeah.
Sandy Moss. But again, the groundwork was laid in because the first was the asbestos program, and then was diethylstilbestrol, DES. They were the first two, and then now there's a new mass tort of the week, it seems.
Right, right, with each new drug that comes out. And now, if we could go back to and I know that you're really involved and still involved in the alternative dispute resolution field. And how does that work? I know that you sometimes act as an arbitrator or all the time. Or...
Well, I'm doing a bunch of things now. As I said, I was on this court for a total of 28 years, and then 8 on the intermediate appellate court, the superior court. And my choice was to stay and work full-time for nothing. So anyway, I decided, with 6 grandchildren, I decided to go into the private sector. And I'm doing a bunch of different things, which is what I think I like. It's one of the things I liked on the superior court, is a whole variety of things.
Right.
I'll arbitrate some cases. I'm doing some just generally with the Dispute Resolution Institute, which Harris Box directs, that I'm with, and some with the American Arbitration Association. I'll mediate a bunch of cases. I'm an expert witness here and there. I'm a discovery master here and there. And I do a lot of consulting for firms that have appeals going to the court where I was. So, run mock appellate arguments, make suggestions on how you structure the arguments and do that. That's a busy part of my life now.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I mean, is alternative dispute resolution really working? Is it
Sure.
diverting cases from the court system?
Oh,
for
sure.
instance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but the backlog would be much worse because very often these cases are the large, complicated cases that could take a couple weeks of trial.
Yeah. Okay.
And they get often they get solved in mediation. And I've had the training a couple times. The National Judicial College in Nevada, and then American Bar Association did a program for judges in Annapolis, and I have some idea of what I'm doing. And it's pretty efficient. The other thing that often happens is, well, there's several things that happen. First of all, a lot of the lawyers could work out a deal, but they're having trouble with their clients. So sometimes they'll come to me as an ex-judge with experience over, thousands of cases to try and, help them convince their clients, which could be an adjuster, it could be a plaintiff.
Yeah.
And often there are cases where there's a range, and the lawyers can't agree on the range, and there's a high-low. In other words, I decide the case, and if the range is between $40,000 and $80,000, if it's in the middle, that's what happens. But if it's $90,000, they still only get 80, and if it's a defense verdict, they still get 40. Things like that. That's another of the things that I wind up doing now.
I imagine that the parties, it must be a more amicable settlement since they're actively involved in your mediation and that sort of thing.
Well, I figure I haven't done a good job unless both sides are angry at me. They both should walk away a little unhappy.
What are you doing? Going for fairness or what?
Everybody sees things their own way, and it's hard to get a change done.
I agree. I agree with you very much there. I just thought of my wife, but it's nothing to do with that. But
well, I remember once. I was trying a homicide case, and my client was arrested for a separate robbery in the middle of the trial and then didn't come back. And I said that wasn't showing consciousness of guilt of the homicide, but of the robbery that shouldn't be brought in. And,
the most recent offense.
Yeah, and the judge ruled against me, and I was convinced reversible error was committed.
Yeah.
And then 6 or 8 months later, I'm on the bench, and the same issue comes up, and all of a sudden it looks different. Maybe it's the altitude of the bench, but it just doesn't seem to be the same issue.
Okay. How about in your life, during your lifetime, in your practice, or even your early life, did you have someone that you really looked up to as a giant or as somebody to to follow.
You mean besides my father?
I was thinking right away about your father. It's an easy one.
Yeah, and my preceptor, they had preceptors then, and my mentor and my first boss, a guy named Don Cohan, who was a great guy, still a great guy, and we were in a firm with Don and another lawyer. There were four of us, and we lost our lease and sort of got gobbled up by Dilworth. And Don emerged, and I emerged, and I should have gone with Don because he went into the real estate business, was incredibly successful. And if I'd done that, I'd have had the style of living that my kids would have liked to have gotten accustomed to. But anyway, I have no regrets.
A lot of judges, well, not a lot, but quite a few of them, it strikes me that the judges I've interviewed have mentioned preceptors and how much of a positive effect. It's like there must be a crowd of these really good guys around who are all preceptors, who were all preceptors.
Well, there's a requirement that you clerk for, in my time, 6 months before you get a license.
Right.
So, and that person was a preceptor. I assume that now it still happens with, senior partners or partners handling associates in law firms. Somebody, shows them the ropes.
Yeah.
It's just not a formal title anymore.
Okay.
Now they're called mentors.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Change of the vocab. Was there any particular case or decision or disposition sentence that you've come up with of which you're particularly proud or that stands out in your mind?
There are just too many.
I know.
To single one out. The ones that get publicity are not really the major cases.
Yeah.
There was one where I remember it was just before Christmas, and a boxer who was a middleweight contender, a pretty good guy, fighter, had committed 2 robberies.
Okay.
And it was my son, who then I guess was 5 or 6, was in the courtroom with me because school was out. And he pled guilty, and, I was going to revoke bail. I did revoke bail.
Yeah.
He then realized he had a gun in his coat, and he'd get hit with the gun charge as well as that. So he decked the sheriff with a very good left hook, by the way, and ran out of the room. And Fensel, who was head of civil disobedience, then was in the room. He was going to pull a gun. The manager says, "We know who he is. We'll get him." And all that was happening. And it happened so quickly, I didn't even push the panic button that we had.
Yeah, right.
So, and they did. A couple undercover police caught him and brought him back in the courtroom. So this was all going on. And afterwards, they turned to my son Jeffrey and said, "Are you going to come back to court again?" He said, "When I come back again, I'm going to go into my grandfather's court." And I think the one that got the most publicity came out of the Philadelphia apartments. Somebody worked the night shift, wanted to sleep in the daytime, and a woman had a yippy dog next door, and he was complaining about it.
Yeah.
And she went to a trainer and got the dog fixed, and the guy was still complaining. So the case came in, and obviously this was not the O.J. Simpson trial, and there were lots of cases in the courtroom. And this woman was sitting there with a big hat and a big straw bag, and we were going there, and then, we start doing it, and the guy says, "The dog's still barking, I can recognize the bark," and the trainer comes in and talks about doing that. And the woman then took the stand and said, "Well, this dog does not bark anymore. And to prove it, we've been here for 2 hours," and she opens up her big straw bag and takes out this little dog who's running around in the hallway. P.S. The guy lost the case. She won. I got, clips from Colorado and from France and Israel about, that was my major case, I guess.
The dog must have been pretty well trained to be sitting for that long inside her pocketbook. One of the standard questions I've been talking with judges about is about the practice of law when you began compared with the practice of law today and how they might be different, or if they're not different, I don't know.
Oh, sure they're different. Well, when I actually first started practicing, which was in 1964, we were billing on a a contract cost so much or will cost so much that there wasn't hourly billing. And that didn't happen until the computers came in. Not necessarily the PCs, but the mainframes where you put all the data in
Right.
and it would come out.
And electric typewriters.
And well, certainly, I mean, when I left the Dilworth office because it was too big for my taste, there were 28 lawyers. I went to a small firm which is now called Cozen and O'Connor with hundreds of lawyers
Right.
and dozens of offices. So the practice has gotten just huge.
Yeah.
The discovery wars are now out of sight compared to what they used to be.
Oh.
I'm trying to think if the criminal practice has changed much. Probably not as much.
Mm-hmm. But the discovery wars. This is a problem with people, just being adamant that we're going to fight you.
Well, when you get into
tooth
court,
and
you're
nail.
talking about tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs or millions of dollars of
Right.
costs in discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly with emails now. I mean, there's a whole cottage
Oh, my
industry of
God,
people who
right.
go through to try and find every email that came out. I mean, where I am now, next to me is the case room of one of the major firms, where you open the door and in there are dozens of lawyers who are sitting at computer screens, not even in cubicles, reviewing documents for privilege or for trade
Oh,
secrets
right.
or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Nobody did that early on.
Wow.
And if that was what my job would be, I'd be practicing my drums a lot more than I do now.
Yeah,
looking for a job as a band leader.
So you're also a musician. Did you used to have a jazz trio or something?
What do you mean used to? I'm still
sorry.
playing.
I'm sorry.
If I'm not playing, they'll be you have to shove the dirt over me, and you wouldn't be able to do an interview like this. No, we've been there's a I mean, other than other odds and ends of gigs, I've been playing once a month at lunchtime at the Reading Terminal. I think we're now in our 29th
Oh,
year.
yeah. Okay.
And there's another place called the 23rd Street Cafe on 23rd Street, right off where the Vine Street Expressway begins, where the non-professional musicians who are professionals in other fields
Yeah.
come for a Tuesday night jam.
Oh, that's cool.
And
I play myself. I played guitar for about 50 years, but jamming, I think, is the best.
oh
form
yeah,
of
well, I mean,
communication.
one of the guitar players has a medical degree and a dental degree and an MBA, and is the assistant head of medicine at Jefferson Hospital.
And he still practices.
And he's good musician.
Yeah.
The house drummer owns shoe stores. Another lawyer who was my law clerk for a while is another drummer.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun.
It's a good release, I know, too. So it can be helpful professionally in a way, in that it lets you forget about professionals.
Well, I'm also known for that, which is probably better than being known for a lot of other things
Yeah,
that could
I
happen.
suppose so. Do you think the attitude, I guess it must, if the practice of law is so much different, then the conduct of trials in the courtroom must also be different. I know some evidentiary things are different.
Less so, I think, when cases finally get to court.
Yeah, all right. Because all of that has gone on beforehand, all the...
Yeah, a lot of that goes on beforehand. For a while, well, I think in general, there's been a decline in civility. Things happen now that occasionally happened in the earlier days, but I think that the respect for each other and for the court has diminished a great deal, and it's been addressed, by the Supreme Court. This just isn't my idea. I mean, a lot of people have talked about that.
Yeah.
For a number of years. Particularly in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, they were really very incredibly hard-nosed, and I think not as easy to work things out as happened in the past.
Yeah.
And again, when you talk about these hundreds and hundreds of people in a law firm, it's got to affect the atmosphere.
Sure.
And also, when you consider what they're paying the first and second year law students, who kind of have to get to jobs because of their huge loans for college and law school.
Right.
And they're trying to make money on them, and they just work incredibly hard hours, and it's not always very interesting stuff. So that's been, I think, a big change.
Yeah.
I think recently the American Bar came out with a statement that the biggest problem now is the fact that so many of the new lawyers come out with huge debts.
Of course.
and how they handle that. And not everybody gets a job with a Wall Street law firm.
Well, I should say not. Being the father of two fairly recent college graduates, I know where that problem, how bad that problem can be. Um, was there any particular moment that you think, or any particular event, a sort of a program? I know you did the ADR, and we talked about that. And you sat in homicide cases, and you're involved in civil and in the futures. Which would be, do you think, your absolute proudest moment?
Well, there are a couple things that happened. I think, again, the work on the Futures Commission was really good work. And again, the idea there was to bring in not just the people in the system, but stakeholders, people who are affected
Right.
by the legal system. And we did a really good job going all over and getting people's input and saying where we think we should go to what possibilities we have 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the future.
Right.
Also,
I mean, even today, the government, there's been a problem with the government governing to the next crisis.
right.
And
Yep.
so forth.
Also, there was a time, I'm trying to figure the year, the courts were having a lot of economic and other problems, and a bunch of the judges were looking toward a lot of different kinds of reforms in different areas, and a thing called the Shepard Committee, where
All right, sure.
Al Shepard basically kept everybody from killing each other,
Right.
and
Good
had a
man.
lot of proposals to make changes. And then Nelson Diaz came in and said, "Let's do it," and there was a whole flutter of activity
Yeah.
at that point in time. I know one of the things that had been working on was the jury selection commission to try and speed things up there. And one of the things is the judges had to go through all these questions in the courtroom, and it could take forever.
Yeah.
So we had Carolyn Temin worked on the criminal end, and I worked on the civil end, and we did a videotape section of the questions, which the people in the jury room would go through and fill out. I mean, some of the people don't take their information from reading, so we had the video do it.
Sure.
They had a video studio in the DA's training room, and I think we put and the theater wing of the bar played the judges, and we put the whole thing together for probably under $400.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They redid it, and it cost like $30,000 later. But
course.
and it was there for years.
Yeah,
but,
I remember.
And Nelson said, "Okay, I want it done in 6 weeks." I said, "What?" He said, "Yep." He said, "I get it done in 6 weeks." He said, "What's the hurry?" He said, "Well, they told me to clean up the court system, but I don't think they meant me to clean it up as much as I'm going to do. And pretty soon they're going to find out what I'm doing and get rid of me," which is what happened.
Right.
So we got it done in a hurry. But a lot of judges were doing a lot of different things then in whole areas of the court, and that was a very exciting time. The one thing that I liked about the trial court here and the assignment in trial court in a city like Philadelphia is you're in juvenile court for a while.
Yeah.
And you get burned out in there, and they get you into the domestic relations family court division. You get burned out in there, and then you go into a list room where there are 13, 14, 20 miscellaneous felonies a day.
Right, yeah.
And then you go into homicide, and then you get into civil, then you get into the master. So you're changing assignments, and you don't get burned out.
Yeah, okay.
And you're still in your chambers, and you still have your staff, but the personnel in the courtroom change. So it's sort of stability, but at the same time something different.
That variety.
But what happened to me was that I'd been there so long that I'd been everywhere. So I kept getting rotating. I was back to second and third. And that's kind of when I sort of thought I'd like to move on to the appellate court.
Yeah, okay. And that's exactly what you did.
Yes, after several efforts to try and get elected, I finally did it right, and was elected to the court.
And as you said, you had a variety of different types of cases there, too.
On the
So
Superior Court, you have almost everything,
Yeah.
Criminal, civil, family, probate, real estate, the whole thing.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for coming today
That's my pleasure.
and participating in the project. Also, for all the work you did for the district and for the state. I appreciate that.
No, thank you very much. I do feel very strongly toward the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania courts, but I'm still, more a Philadelphia Common Pleas Court judge than a Superior Court.
There
So a
you
lot
go.
more years there.
All right, it's hard to shake it off, isn't it? It's Judge Richard B. KLEIN, formerly of the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas in the First Judicial District and the Pennsylvania Superior Court, and now involved in alternate dispute resolution. Thanks, Judge.